Nobody's going to get a Nobel Peace Prize for denuclearization of North Korea. The only Nobel Peace Prize that will be given will be those who contribute to a free and unified Korea, who free the Korean people in the North. That is what will be worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, the stories are heart-wrenching, you know, and anybody who hears them should immediately want to do something. Koreans, when given the opportunity, they will thrive. When faced with hardship, they will survive. And that's true of Koreans on both sides of the DMZ. We should send information in that is respectful about the Korean people in the North, and show them what the future can look like. And everyone should take efforts to get information into North Korea. We need a human rights upfront approach, and we need to educate the Korean people in the North on their inalienable rights, their universal human rights. Get your education, get experience in whatever area that you love, that interests you, and those skills and your passion can be applied to helping free the Korean people in the North and uniting the two Koreas into a free and unified Korea. Yes, well, first of all, I've never really worked actually with North Korea per se, but I had 5 military tours in South Korea. I first came to Korea in 1986, and I was a young officer, and I was stationed on the DMZ in Korea. I had come from Germany, where I'd been stationed on the inter-German border between East and West Germany, so I saw that communist problem, and then I came from Germany, short stop in the United States, and to Korea. So that really started my work on Korea, and I really became very interested in the Korea problem and what is known as the Korea question, which comes from paragraph 60 of the Armistice Agreement, which really, the Korea question is the unnatural division of the Korean Peninsula. And so the military leaders who negotiated the armistice, in paragraph 60, they said the political leaders need to come together to solve the Korea question. And so as I progressed in my career, I spent my time in Special Forces. I spent from 1989 to 1994 in Korea, going back and forth. I was in Korea for the nuclear crisis when we thought we were going to war. And then I went to school at Fort Leavenworth, and I spent 2 years in school, and the second year at the School of Advanced Military Studies, and I wrote my second monograph on the catastrophic collapse of North Korea. Wow. And at the time, this was 1994 to 1996, during the Great Famine, the Arduous March, and we thought that North Korea was going to collapse. Wow. And so I wanted to look at the problem, and of course the suffering. We think as many as 3 million people may have perished from the effects of the famine. And so I wrote that monograph, and then they sent me back to Korea. And I became a planner now at the theater level at the ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command, the United Nations Command. Wow. And the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Cohen, in his first act as the Secretary, tasked Korea to plan for the collapse of North Korea. Wow. And so I met Bob Collins, who had written the 7 phases of the collapse of North Korea, and together we worked on the plan for North Korea and the collapse of North Korea. And we wrote the first contingency plan for the catastrophic collapse. It was called Conplan 5029. It was for North Korean instability and regime collapse. And so, but what really got me interested in that is that while we focus on war, we focus on nuclear weapons, no one would really talk about what comes next. And while we talk about the suffering of the Korean people, nobody really talks about what happens after war or after regime collapse. And of course, I go back to paragraph 60 of the armistice. You've got to solve the Korea question. And I say all this because at that time it really focused me on a path towards unification, and it's really resulted in, of all the work I've done for the last 30 years, can be distilled down to just 12 words, which is unification first, then denuclearization, and the path to unification is through human rights. 12 words, and that's really the essence. And we have to try to get people to understand that we really need information, we need a human rights upfront approach, and we need to focus on achieving a free and unified Korea, because it is only through a free and unified Korea that we will end the nuclear threat and the threat of war, and of course, most importantly, that we will free the Korean people in the North. Yeah, so I tried to distill it down so that people could think about it, people could remember what those, what the real concept is, that it is unification first, then denuclearization.
Yeah.
Because we are so focused on the nuclear threat, which is a threat. I mean, I am not downplaying the nuclear threat at all, but we have failed to denuclearize North Korea for 2 decades, and all of the policies have failed. And we've successfully deterred war for 70 years.
Yeah.
We've deterred nuclear attack for 20 years, but we have done nothing to solve the problem. And the only way we're going to see an end to the nuclear threats, the military threats, and the crimes against humanity, against the Korean people in the North, is through achievement of a secure, stable, non-nuclear, economically vibrant, unified Korea that's unified under a liberal constitutional form of government based on freedom, individual liberty, free market principles, and human rights as determined by the Korean people in the North.
Wow.
And I would add this, Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that all people have the right to self-determination of government, the right to decide what kind of government they want to live in. We take that for granted in America. South Korea has had that right and just exercised that right in June of 2025. But the Korean people in the North have never had that right. And it's time that they have that right and they determine that they can live in a free and unified Korea.
Wow, thank you. So with that, what are the most common misconceptions Americans have about North Korea and their people?
Well, I think you have to ask it that way. North Korea, the Kim family regime, and the Korean people in the North. First of all, to really understand the Korean people in the North, we should really read the work of Bob Collins and Song Moon, which is the social classification system, and how the society in North Korea is broken down into the elite, the loyal class, the wavering class, and then the disloyal class. But they're broken down into 51 different classes.
Wow.
And their entire life is governed by those social classifications. And so we have to understand that. But we have to separate the caricatures of Kim Jong-un, the Kim family regime that we see both by people who are creating memes and things like that, Rocket Man, all of those things, from the Korean people who are really suffering. And one of the biggest misconceptions is that the Korean people in the North are backwards and living in a very antiquated, old-fashioned society, which is true to a great extent, but the Korean people in the North are extremely resilient, and they have survived, and they have demonstrated tremendous ingenuity. In one of my lectures, I have a picture of a North Korean truck that has smoke coming out of it, and it is powered by a wood-burning stove. And so you say that, wow, that is really crude and really, really backwards, and but it also shows the ingenuity and the resilience they have to make things work for them. And so there's incredibly hard-working people in the North who are simply oppressed by this regime. And of course, this is the most important thing to remember. While everybody talks about the U.S. military exercises with South Korea, Kim Jong-un does not fear the U.S. military and the South Korean military the way we think he does. I mean, yes, we deter war, we prevent war, but his biggest fear is not the military, but the Korean people in the North. And when they are armed with information, particularly information about the South, and to him, the South is a threat. It's an existential threat. Not the military as much, while the South Korean military is superior to the North's, but it is the example of South Korea that is the existential threat, because the more the Korean people in the North understand South Korea, the more they want that, and the more they question why they can't have that. And the reason they can't have that is because Kim Jong-un seeks all power and all control, and so he controls information, and that control of information, of course, is one of the egregious human rights abuses. In 2014, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry, Justice Kirby, one of the findings was that the isolation of the Korean people in the north and the fact that the regime prevents information from going to the people is a human rights abuse.
Wow.
And of course, the report calls on all countries to provide information to the Korean people in the north because they deserve it.
Yeah.
And so, which is of course troubling, the fact that we have stopped Voice of America, we have stopped Radio Free Asia. South Korea, the National Intelligence Service, after 50 years, has stopped South Korean radio broadcasts into the north.
Yeah.
All of this is really playing right into the hands of Kim Jong-un and his political warfare strategy. So, and by stopping information, it may seem counterintuitive, but we're actually supporting him. We're helping him to be stronger because he can further isolate the people and he can further oppress them. So that's why information is so important. There are 4 paths to unification. There is peaceful unification, there is war, there is regime collapse, and then there's internal change inside North Korea. So peaceful unification is what we want, and we must plan for it, even though the path to peaceful unification is the least likely to be achieved, because Kim Jong-un will not give up power. And it is highly unlikely that there can be any kind of negotiated path to unification with the Kim family regime in power. Because for the regime, it is about survival, and the only path to their long-term survival is unification. But it's not unification as we see it, it is domination, where the North system dominates the entire peninsula and rules all of Korea under what I like to call the guerrilla dynasty of Gulag state of North Korea.
Yeah.
So peaceful unification is unlikely in that way. However, peaceful unification must be planned for because it is the most complex, because it requires the complete integration of 2 economic systems, 2 political systems, 2 militaries, and the divergent cultures that have developed over the last 70 years.
Yeah.
And so we really need the Ministry of Unification to be producing the grand strategy for how there's going to be integration of all these areas. Now, I said it's the least likely to occur in that way.
Yeah.
However, planning for peaceful unification is important. One, because it's the moral high ground. Nobody can deny and nobody can criticize the desire for peaceful unification. And so this is the overt planning that must be conducted, complete transparency, and it's going to really entail many different things. Just one example is the infrastructure in North Korea will have to be rebuilt. But the opportunity in North Korea is so much different than Germany, in East and West Germany, and of course that scares a lot of people, East and West German unification. North Korea is going to have to be rebuilt, but it's a tremendous opportunity. And what is the opportunity? It is to create smart cities, to use leap-ahead technology in North Korea. South Korea has developed smart cities. Well, now they can, the companies in South Korea, with experts in North Korea, can really develop Pyongyang into a smart city. Wonsan, Hamhung, all of the major cities can become smart cities. And they can develop the infrastructure, the transportation networks, the power generation, all in modern standards. In fact, North Korea can become the example for the rest of the world on how to bring an impoverished country not only into the modern world, but more advanced than the current modern world. So that's one idea.
Wow.
Now, the second path, of course, is war. And we want to prevent that. And everything we do from a military perspective is to prevent war. We don't have plans to invade North Korea. We are not hostile towards North Korea, but we demonstrate the strength and resolve that if attacked, this combined South Korean and U.S. military will defend South Korea and then defeat the North Korean People's Army. Now, and just keep that in mind. The third path is regime collapse. This is where the regime collapses, and we define regime collapse this way. When the Korean Workers' Party can no longer govern from the center, from Pyongyang. They can no longer govern all of the territory in the north. Combined with the condition of the military, the loss of coherence of the military and support for the regime. So when we see breakdowns in the chain of command, and there are 3 chains of command which we call chains of control in the Korean military, North Korean military. When they break down and the inability to govern from the center, that's going to cause regime collapse. The challenge and the danger of that is that when Kim Jong-un faces the conditions of possible collapse, he could give an order to go to war as his only path to unification, to domination. And so we should not wish for regime collapse, but we must plan for it. Now the fourth, and the outlier is, and I would say this, for war and regime collapse, what's really important is that everything we plan for peaceful unification, if there is war or there is regime collapse, all of that planning will still be valuable and still be employed post-war and post-collapse. And so, as I said, even though peaceful unification is unlikely to be achieved in the classic negotiated way, all of the planning for it will never go to waste. It will be applied in every scenario, in particularly the fourth scenario. And the fourth scenario is where there is internal change inside North Korea and new leadership emerges. And how does new leadership emerge? Two things: information and human rights. And so the Korean people in the north need information. They really need 5 kinds of information. The first is massive amounts of news and entertainment about the world, so that they understand what's going on in the world and their place in it. The second is practical information. Everything from how to improve their agriculture, to improve their market activity, and how to take collective action, how to create the conditions for change. The third is they need facts, because the facts lead to truth. I learned this from dealing with Koreans from the north, from escapees or the North Korean diaspora. They don't believe, they don't find the truth right away. But when they get information and then they see facts, and when actions confirm that information, then they see the truth. So we've got to get facts from North Korea, not memes, not insults of Kim Jong-un. We need to get facts. And then the fourth is they need to have an understanding of their universal human rights. They've got to understand, and it's sad, but I've met Koreans from the north. This one young woman, it really broke my heart. She thought she was free in North Korea. And she explains that, she was told she was free, so she thought she was free.
Wow. Until
she escaped. And she was standing in Seoul, downtown on the street, and when she was looking at the people, everybody dressed differently, everybody doing different things, and she realized she had no idea what freedom was inside North Korea. And that's how most of the Korean people in the north feel. They don't know freedom like we take for granted. And so they have to understand their human rights, their value as human beings, as people. They're as valuable as you and me. And they need to understand that. So that is why we need a human rights upfront approach, and we need to educate the Korean people in the north on their inalienable rights, their universal human rights. And then the fifth thing they need to hear is messages from the North Korean diaspora, from escapees who are now living in South Korea, in the United States, in the UK, in Europe. Their success stories, and they are really the key communicators who provide the bridge really from South Korea to North Korea, but from the outside world to the Korean people. Yes, of course, North Korea vilifies them as defectors, as traitors, but I don't like to call them defectors because they escaped from the most authoritarian country in the world. And so, but their information is important because the Korean people in the north, when they hear that, they know that these are of the same life, the same people that they are, and so they can hear the facts from them and learn the truth from them. So, in short, they need massive amounts of information, we need practical information, we need facts, truth, we need understanding of human rights, and we need voices from the Korean people who lived in the north. And that is how we help change. Now, how things change, we don't know, but I will tell you 2 things, and one thing is very important from the lesson from our president and CEO, Greg Scarlatti, who lived through the Romanian Revolution. We should be focused on the North Korean People's Army, and we should be transmitting messages to them. And there's a couple different messages that we should focus on. Number 1 is, don't attack South Korea. Disobey the order to attack. And for the generals and the senior ranking officers, if you don't attack South Korea, you will have a place in a free and unified Korea. And so we want them to get that message. The second message is, and this is the lesson I learned from Greg Scarlett, is that we want them to put down their arms when the Korean people in the North want change. You know, when Greg Scarlett was in Romania, when the Romanian army was ordered to fire on the civilian population, they made the decision to put down their arms. And that's what made the revolution successful. We need to have that same kind of effect on the North Korean People's Army so that they do not use their weapons against the Korean people in the North. And so we need to transmit those messages to them and help create the conditions that will allow change. This can't be controlled, it can't be directed from the outside, it must be organic, but through information, through support, through the world, letting the Korean people in the North know that that we are on their side, you know, that can give them hope and confidence, and they can envision a future where they can be free at last.
With that, one question is how, if you feel comfortable answering this one, what is the best way that you recommend that we can get the information there? And it also applies to the other question that what role should the international community play in preparing for Korean unification?
Right. Well, that's a great question. Well, first of all, we should turn back on Voice of America and Radio Free Asia. South Korean radio broadcast should go into North Korea. And everyone should take efforts to get information into North Korea. And the international community, they don't have to do a lot. All they have to do is explain their culture, their countries, you know, the differences that exist. They don't have to compare, they just have to tell their stories. And we need to get stories into North Korea. One of the things that I think is really interesting is I met with 7 former North Korean soldiers. And I asked them about the K-drama, Crash Landing on You, which I think everybody has seen. And it's a great rom-com. It's really heartwarming and everything. And so I asked them, I said, how do the Korean soldiers in the North view this? What do they think about this? And one of them answered that it makes them want to come to the South even more than they already do. But another one gave a very perceptive answer. And that answer was that when he saw the K-drama, that it made him feel like South Korea was a very strong and confident country. And the reason was because in that drama, they portrayed the Korean people in the North as human beings, not as the enemy, not as monsters. And they portrayed the Korean people and even the Korean military with respect and dignity. And he believed that shows how confident South Korea is because in the North, all of their propaganda vilifies the South. You know, they insult the South, they insult South Korean leaders. They say that South Korea is a puppet of the United States and that South Korea is inferior in every way. And so for him to hear South Korea talk about the Korean people in the North in a dignified manner, it made him really believe that South Korea is a strong and confident country. And that's a very important lesson for the kind of information that we send into North Korea. Many people want to send insulting things, and because we don't like Kim Jong-un, we think he's a bad guy, that we should talk about him that way. But instead, we should send information in that is respectful about the Korean people in the North, and show them what the future can look like. And that's what's really going to help create change. And every country that has the capabilities to broadcast into North Korea should do that. But we also need to create other ways. There's so many technological capabilities, whether it's Starlink and low Earth orbit satellites. We have to devise ways to penetrate the internet that exists inside North Korea. You know, there's 8 million smartphones inside North Korea, but it's segregated, isolated from the outside world. Well, we can develop the technology to penetrate that. I'm sure Samsung and other technological giants can do that. And so we should be focused on that, although, you know, the challenge is there's really no profit motive for that. You know, there's not a good business case for that. It is only a public good, and hopefully companies will say, you know, if we help create change, later there will be markets. Later there will be great economic opportunities. But we've got to, you know, either the governments have to fund this, or companies have to look at this as a public good for the people, and then for later economic opportunities. But it can be done, and that's what we need to be pushing for.
Thank you. What advice would you offer to a North Korean escapee who has come out of North Korea and they're adjusting to freedom and a new life? And maybe what would you tell them about the truth of their situation, or anything that you would encourage them to do?
Oh, that's a tough question. Not having been in their shoes, I think that's really one of the most difficult things that we should all be careful about, because we haven't walked in their shoes and we can't see things through their eyes. And so I don't want to judge them. I don't want to tell them what to do. I think the most important thing is to make sure that they know that we support them, that we recognize the hardships, we recognize the challenges, and I would want them to know that we are here to help. Certainly not everybody. Everybody has their, but there are people like the members of this organization, the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, like the college groups all around the United States, Liberty in North Korea. There are people that care about them. And of course, in the South, there's some 30,000 escapees from the North, and they have a challenging life, and we should respect the fact, again, things we take for granted. But one of the hardest things that we've seen for escapees is to make decisions, because they don't make decisions inside North Korea. They have very little decision-making power. And in the free world, there's so much choice, and it can be overwhelming. And so it's important that we recognize how that can be overwhelming, and to help them understand that it's okay to be overwhelmed. And we are overwhelmed too. We have information overload. They're not alone, but they certainly have a much more difficult time with dealing with massive amounts of information and freedom of choice. And so, but what's most important for them is to exercise that freedom of choice, take advantage of it, and that is, I think, their path to the future. And I think we see that play out. All of the escapees I've been dealing with over the years, so many of them now are lawyers, IT workers, graduate students, and journalists. They're really becoming very accomplished. Yes, some have hard times. Yes, we've seen some tragic events take place with those who could not fit in, and who were not properly cared for, and so there have been tragedies. But I would say that the vast majority get along, and many flourish. And those that flourish, they're going to be the future leaders of a free and unified Korea. And that's the other thing that I would say to all of them, is that in addition to thriving and living a good life, please contribute to preparing for a free and unified Korea. As I said, these people are going to be the bridge between North and South. And so get your education, get experience in whatever area that you love, that interests you, and those skills and your passion can be applied to helping free the Korean people in the North and uniting the two Koreas into a free and unified Korea, a united Republic of Korea, which is UROK, which I like to say is you rock.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I was at a conference, and there was an admiral from the South Korean Navy, and he turned to me and said, there are two miracles in Korea. And I said, sure, I know the miracle on the Han. South Korea rose from the ashes of the Korean War, the only OECD nation to go from a major aid recipient to a major donor nation. And we have the miracle on the Han with the economic expansion and development. Now they're the 10th largest economy in the world. They have the 6th largest military, but their culture and their democracy has really been a model for the world. And Korea has really evolved into what's called a global pivotal state that chooses to be a peaceful nuclear power, that's a partner in the arsenal of democracies, that seeks to have a free and open Asia, Indo-Pacific, and employ the rules-based and live within the rules-based international order. So that's the Korea miracle, the miracle in the Han in the South. But I asked him, what is the miracle in the North? And he said, well, that's the miracle on the Taedong. The Taedong-gang. It's a Taedong River, like the Han River in Seoul, is the river that cuts through Pyongyang, through the capital city. And I said, what is that miracle? He said, the miracle is after 70 years, the Korean people in the North, living under the worst oppressive authoritarian system in modern history, that they have survived. The people have survived.
Mm.
And the lesson is in this, is that even though North and South Korea seem so vastly different, the commonality between North and South is that if you give Koreans the opportunity, they will thrive. But when faced with hardship, they will survive. And this is borne out in North Korea because, yes, they've survived the arduous march, the terrible famine of 94 to 96, but they survived that, but they also thrived. And it is their ability to develop the markets when the public distribution system failed, the food distribution system failed by the party. They developed the markets, and primarily women, mothers that really developed the markets, demonstrated the entrepreneurial spirit. Developing black markets that became gray markets, and now there's some 400 markets inside North Korea. And that is what has created the resilience in the North Korean population, and why they continue to survive through famines, through floods and droughts and poor harvests, because they can trade, they work together really to survive. And so that is really the lesson. Koreans, when given the opportunity, they will thrive. When faced with hardship, they will survive. And that's true of Koreans on both sides of the DMZ.
That's wonderful, thank you. So how can the stories of North Korean defectors be used to raise awareness and drive policy change?
Yeah, that's very important, and policy change is what's necessary. And so the stories from the Korean people in the North, from the escapees, they need to be told, they need to be amplified.
Yeah.
We need to get them to Capitol Hill. We need to get them to the international community. And this is why organizations, and I'm so proud to be a member of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, the people who work at HRNK, reach out to Congress, reach out and also sponsor events, conferences that allow the stories of the Korean people in the North to be told, to expose the human rights abuses. This is what we must do, and we must help people to understand that human rights is not only a moral imperative, it's an absolute moral imperative, but it's also a national security issue. And it needs to be, human rights needs to be discussed as much as denuclearization. And in fact, we should realize that when we talk about denuclearization in North Korea, we're actually strengthening the regime because it reinforces the fact that he has nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And their propaganda uses that. However, when we talk about human rights, it undermines the legitimacy of the regime. And so every time we have to talk about nuclear weapons, we should also talk about human rights. One example is in 2023, North Korea fired almost 70 missile tests, which cost them about $760 million. And at the time, the World Food Program said that they were short of food about $410 million. And so I don't like to do public math, but 760 versus 410 tells me if they stopped firing missiles and spent those resources on the people, they would vastly improve the lives of the people, the human rights of the Korean people in the North. And that indicates the problem with North Korea is the Kim family regime. It's the deliberate policy decisions to prioritize nuclear weapons and its military and support to the elite over the welfare of the Korean people in the North. So these are the stories that need to be told to decision makers, to policy makers, and while we can talk about it and we can expose that, the more that they can hear from the North Korean diaspora, those who've lived it, and can actually tell their stories, their suffering, and there is tremendous suffering. I mean, the stories are heart-wrenching, and anybody who hears them should immediately want to do something and want to help. And that's why stories from the North Korean diaspora, from escapees, are so important, because they have the power to influence and to change minds, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Thank you. This other question that I had put in here, I guess it went along with some of the things that you wrote, and I'll ask it because you mentioned that you are willing to keep going, but it says, what is the new strategy that you suggest since Kim Jong-un's recent policy changes? You mentioned including South Korea as the main enemy and abandoned peace communication present as an opportunity for a new strategy. What were your thoughts on what the new strategy could look like?
Yeah. First of all, we should not be duped by Kim Jong-un. Calling South Korea the main enemy and ending the objective of peaceful unification. Yeah. Those two things, I think, are misunderstood by many people. The first is that people interpret that as wanting peaceful coexistence. Yeah. Two countries. He said there are two countries, and South Korea is the enemy. And the fact that they no longer seek peaceful unification, that means that they want to coexist and live together and not absorb the South. Nothing could be further from the truth. They have not abandoned the objective to dominate the entire Korean Peninsula. And that's what people overlook. They haven't changed their constitution, they haven't changed their party documents. It still calls for one Korea under the rule of North Korea to complete the revolution on the Korean Peninsula that Kim Il-sung supposedly started, and one of the objectives is to rid the peninsula of all foreign influence, kick the Americans out. So that's where we are in this, and we need to understand that. And the second thing we need to understand is that our strategies have failed. Our engagement strategies, our denuclearization strategies have all failed. They have failed to change the behavior of Kim Jong-un. We've tried. In 1997, the regime might have collapsed if it wasn't for the Sunshine Policy, and which resulted in the transfer of billions of dollars saving the regime. Save the regime. As I already described, the people saved themselves through the development of the markets. But the regime could have collapsed at that point, but the Sunshine Policy extended the life of the regime. And of course, since 2006, and really going back to 1994, we've tried to denuclearize. And every agreement has been broken by the North. They've cheated, they've lied, they've cheated, and they've stolen money in every way. So all of these strategies have failed. So we need a new strategy. I call it the 2+3. The first two are the two traditional strategies. Number one is deter war, prevent war. We must maintain a strong military presence to prevent conflict. That is job one. It is in U.S. and, of course, South Korean vital interest to prevent war on the peninsula. But if North Korea attacks, we will defeat the North Korean People's Army and end the regime and put on the path to the unification process. That's number one. The second one is a strategic strangulation campaign. And this is to cut off the resources that Kim Jong-un gets from around the world. His weapons proliferation activities, missiles to conflict areas in the Middle East, to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, to Iran, throughout Africa in conflict zones. The use of illicit activities of counterfeiting money, counterfeiting drugs, counterfeiting cigarettes, trafficking in methamphetamines, and of course cyber attacks. And of course now support to Russia. Some 6 million rounds of ammunition have gone to Russia, 600 weapon systems. And of course Russia is providing money to Kim Jong-un. So all of that money is helping him not only to survive, but to build advanced military weapons, which of course contribute to his political warfare strategy to undermine the ROC-US alliance, his blackmail diplomacy strategy, which is to use increased tensions, threats, and provocations to gain political and economic concessions, and develop advanced military capabilities to support political warfare and blackmail diplomacy, but also to have the capability to attack the South if he creates the conditions that are right for attack. And those conditions, the number one conditions, is the removal of U.S. troops from the Korean Peninsula. So those are the two traditional strategies that we really need to focus on. The three new, and I call this radical new because we've never done this. We need a human rights upfront approach. We need a sophisticated and holistic information and influence campaign. And we need to set as the objective and pursue a free and unified Korea. And so you have 5 parts of a strategy that we should be looking at from a holistic perspective and focus on doing this. But keeping in mind that the solution to the Korea question, the unnatural division of the Korean Peninsula, must be solved by the Korean people. Yes, the U.S., we have a responsibility. We contributed to the occupation of Korea by Japan in the Taft-Katsura agreement in 1905 in the brokering of the surrender of the Russo-Japanese War, which ironically President Roosevelt received the Nobel Peace Prize for. And that's another question to talk about on the Nobel Peace Prize. We, of course, divided the peninsula in 1945 at the end of the World War II. We divided it to prevent the Soviet military from occupying all of South Korea, but we, that division, of course, ended up being what caused the two Koreas to exist.
Yeah.
Only because North Korea refused to participate in elections in 1948 for the entire peninsula.
Wow.
And then, of course, we restrained South Korea from developing a military that could defend itself. We were so afraid of South Korea attacking the North that we only allowed South Korea to have a small army in 1950. They only had 50,000 men, no tanks, no artillery, whereas North Korea had 100,000 North Korean soldiers return from the Chinese Civil War at the end of 1945, and Stalin gave them T-34 tanks, which allowed them to attack on June 25th, 1950. And so we have a lot of responsibility for the situation, but the solution cannot be imposed by the United States or the international community. It must be by the Korean people, and so we have an obligation to support the Korean people as they pursue a free and unified Korea. And so that's what I really would like to emphasize, our support to the Korean people on both sides of the DMZ.
Wow, I love that. I love that, like, talking about that support to the people, that like they will be the ultimate ones to unify themselves, but that we can be there to support, and that we can feel a bit of responsibility, but it will ultimately come from them.
Yes.
I can see that.
Sometimes people call me an expert, but I'm humbled by that.
Yeah.
But I don't consider myself an expert. And the reason is because nobody can really know what's going on inside North Korea.
Yeah.
And so I consider myself a student of the Korean problem.
Wow.
I study it. We've all got to figure it out. And we have to figure out what's right, again, to help the Korean people on both sides of the DMZ.
That's true. Thank you. And thank you for your analysis and what you've shared. Is there anything else that you'd like to share today?
I think you asked great questions. I think I got most, those are all the key points I really like to emphasize in
That's
these
great.
things. So, I hope you can take lessons you learn from here and apply them in the future. This is, and what's really important, is it still rolling?
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
yeah.
so what's really important is, I'm an old guy, and we have a lot of old people that are passionate about this. We need young people. We need, the next generation to be focused. And I'm heartened because I meet so many young people who are just as passionate, if not more passionate, than we are. And so I urge young people to accept this mission and to put everything they can into it, because, this is a noble mission. And the last thing I will say, people talk about winning a Nobel Peace Prize. Nobody's going to get a Nobel Peace Prize for denuclearization of North Korea. The only Nobel Peace Prize that will be given will be those who contribute to a free and unified Korea, who free the Korean people in the North. That is what will be worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize. Just having negotiations, talks, even an arms control agreement, none of that will lead to a Nobel Peace Prize. Only the achievement of a free and unified Korea and the freedom for 25 million people in the North.